Our guest speaker tonight is Mark Thornton. He's been on our Friday night several times, and he can give a little bit about himself and his topic tonight. Go for it, Mark.
Well, all right. You know the topic, but before I get to that, I would like to point out Proverbs 28, verse 1. The wicked flee when no one pursues, but the righteous are bold as a lion. And I can't help but notice that the world is full of a bunch of cowards running in fear. But we don't have to be afraid. So just thought I'd throw that one in. But the topic tonight is replacement theology in the Bible. Now, that term, of course, is not actually in the Bible. And I actually did not hear that term until 2009, just 11 years ago. I've been keeping Sabbaths and holy days for 36 years, but I did not hear that term till 11 years ago now. And I think that, I don't know when you first heard it, but I don't think that term has been around for very long, to my knowledge. And I think that's because it's directly associated with a certain movement. It has only been around for some 15 years or so, 15, 20 years. Now, that is the idea, when people refer to replacement theology, that is the idea that the church has spiritually replaced Israel, not physically, but spiritually. And I've been accused of that many times, and I've been accused of heresy for what people have accused me of replacement theology, and that is always followed with, you're trying to say that there's no law. Well, I've never said that. I've never once said that there's no law, and I'm not going to, but I guess the implication is that Israel owns the law, and you have to be an Israelite to keep it. Well, you don't have to be an Israelite to keep the law, and Israel does not own the law. There's no copyright on it because those are God's law. So let's just get that one out of the way right away. Now, this also addresses the issue of what is the relationship of the church with Israel. Is it the same? Some people think Israel is the church and vice versa. Some people think that the church is a subset of Israel. And then there's the other idea that the church is completely separate from Israel. And then there's the idea of when Christ returns, is he going to marry Israel or is he going to marry the church? These are all things that we need to address. So let's start off with Jeremiah 3, verse 8. Now, where did I write this? Great, I didn't write it down here. But then I saw that for all the causes for which backsliding Israel had committed adultery, I had put her away and given her a certificate of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but went and played the harlot also. Now, God basically, he made a covenant with Israel at Mount Sinai. When he gave them the 10 Commandments, they agreed to keep them. Now, it's basically a marriage covenant. So that covenant was broken by the Israelites because, after all, any marriage in any nation in the world is nullified by adultery. And idolatry is a spiritual form of adultery. The vast majority of the ancient Israelites worshipped pagan gods. They would continue to pay lip service to Yahweh, the true God, but they also worshipped pagan gods. But that was not acceptable. And that's why God divorced them. That was the main reason. It wasn't the only reason. They were breaking other laws too. Now, there's a lot of people, some people, that think that the purpose of the new covenant was to override Deuteronomy 24, verse 4, which specifically says that once a man divorces his wife, he cannot remarry her. And one of the people that was saying that was the late Reggie White, who I really admire. I think he was a great man, but I really don't agree with that. It never says anywhere in the Bible that the purpose of the new covenant is to override and nullify Deuteronomy 24, verse 4. You cannot remarry a wife that you divorced, assuming that she's been with another guy. And I don't know where people come up with that, but I think that's just wishful thinking. So I want to move on to Matthew 22. Now, where do people come up with the idea that the church has somehow replaced Israel? Well, I'll tell you where it comes from, and I'll just start reading in Matthew 22, starting at verse 1. And Jesus answered and spoke and said to them again in the parables, and said, the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who arranged a marriage for his son, and sent out his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding, and they were not willing to come. Again, he sent out other servants, saying, tell those who were invited, see, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fatted cattle are killed, and all things are ready. Come to the wedding. But they made light of it and went their ways, one to his own farm, another to his business. And the rest seized his servants, treated them spitefully, and killed them. But when the king heard about it, he was furious. And he sent out his armies and destroyed those murderers and burned up their city. Then he said to his servants, the wedding is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy. Therefore, go into the highways, and as many as you find, invite to the wedding. So those servants went out into the highways and gathered together all of whom they found, both bad and good, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came to see the guests, he saw a man who there did not have on a wedding garment. And he said to him, friend, how did you come here without a wedding garment? And he was speechless. Then the king said to the servants, bind him hand and foot, take him away, cast him into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are called and few are chosen. Now, we have to identify who these people are. Now, who were the people that were originally invited to this wedding? Now, I think this is kind of obvious, but a lot of people don't get it. Now I'm open to comments on this. But who were the people that were originally invited to the wedding? Tell me. Anybody? Can you hear me out there?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, Don can hear me. Well, I'll just go ahead and answer myself. The people who were originally invited to the wedding was ancient Israel. And yes, there was always a righteous remnant from Israel, and there still is to this day. But like I said, the vast majority of those people worship pagan gods. They weren't really truly righteous. They were a bunch of no-shows. So God replaced them with another group of people. And guess who that other group of people was, or is? It's the ecclesia, the elect, otherwise known as the church. Now we get to verse 11 here. There's somebody there without a wedding garment who wasn't supposed to be there. Well, as we know, the ecclesia is made up of wheat and tares. There's weeds mixed in with the wheat. And the man without the wedding garment is one of the tares. It's not that complicated. I think that's pretty obvious. Are we good so far here? Anybody listening?
Yeah, I hear you.
All right, well, I might get a comment by now. But now I'm going to go to Romans 11. Very important. And this one is, I think, been very misunderstood. Because what we have here is an analogy, kind of a parable. Now, I'm going to start Romans 11:7. This one gets overlooked a lot. What then? Israel has not obtained what it seeks, but the elect have obtained it, and the rest were hardened. So there's two different groups being described here. They're not the same entity. So I think we can conclude, first of all, the church is not Israel, and the church is not a subset of Israel. It's a separate group. Now, which one do you want to be a part of? Now we'll go forward to the olive tree. And we're going to pick that up in verse 17. And some of the branches were broken off. And you, being a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them, and with them became a partaker of the root and the fatness of the olive tree. Do not boast against the branches, but if you boast, remember that you do not support the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, the branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. Well said. Because of unbelief, they were broken off. And you stand by faith. Do not be haughty, but fear. Now, who were the broken branches? That should be an easy one. All right. I think this was kind of obvious. The broken branches were the unbelieving Jews. Now, there were some Jews that did believe, but they were only a remnant. Now, the word remnant features prominently in the Bible, but the word remnant is not to be confused with everybody, because the word remnant only refers to a small minority. The vast majority of the Jews rejected Jesus. It's only a very small percentage of them that accepted him. They were broken off because of unbelief. Now, are the Jews still part of Israel? Are they separated from Israel? I don't think that they are. They're still part of Israel. But the olive tree is not Israel. That's what almost everybody thinks. And people keep thinking you've got to be grafted into Israel, and it's all about Israel and Israel and Israel, Israel, and they want to learn Hebrew and dress up like rabbis and move to Israel. No, you don't have to be grafted into Israel. The elect is a separate group. It's a separate entity from Israel. All right. Personally, I don't want to be grafted into a bunch of dead branches. I don't want to be grafted into a group of people that has not obtained what they seek. I don't want to be grafted into a group of people that hate Jesus. I don't want to be grafted into a group of people that God has divorced. That's just me. All right, now, what does it mean to be Abraham's seed? For that, we'll start with we'll start with John 15, 1 and 2. Well, okay, first of all, it says, this is what Christ said, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch that bears fruit, he prunes that it might bear more fruit. Now, I think that, notice the word olive tree is not mentioned in here, but I think that it's just, the principle is the same as the one that Paul was describing in Romans 11. It's not about Israel, it's about Christ. You got to be connected to Christ. Now, we don't want to replace the church with Israel. That's the way I look at it. Now, we have to look at Romans 4, verse 11. All right. Abraham, this is a reference to Abraham, that he might be the father of all those who believe. Now, when people read the word Abraham, they think that's synonymous with the word Israel. It's really not. Now, what does it really mean to be Abraham's seed? Well, Galatians 3:7 explains that. Therefore, know that only those who are of the faith are sons of Abraham. You can be a physical descendant of Abraham and not be one of the faithful. Most of the Israelites were not among the faithful. The Arabs are descendants of Abraham. There's like 1 billion of them. They're not heirs to any promise at all. They're not among the faithful. They believe in Muhammad. Now, the real clincher is in Galatians 3, Galatians 3, 28 and 29. Now, this is a big one. There is neither Jew nor Greek, nor there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female. For all you are all one in Christ. And if you are Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. It's not about Israel, it's about Christ. It's not about genetics, it's about belief. It's only those who are the faithful that are the seed of Abraham. It's not physical, it's symbolic. All right. Have we got that one? Now, maybe we should go to Matthew 3. And this is about John the Baptist. I'll start in verse 5. Then Jerusalem, all Judea, and all the region around Jordan and all around came to him, and were baptized by him in the Jordan, confessing their sins. But when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees coming to his baptism, he said to them, Brood of vipers, who has warned you to flee from the wrath that is to come? Therefore bear fruits worthy of repentance, and do not think to say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father. For I say to you, that God is able to raise up children to Abraham from these stones. Well, just because somebody's a descendant of Abraham doesn't necessarily mean anything. And by the way, Pharisees and the Sadducees were the most respected people in that society, but John the Baptist didn't think anything of them, neither did Jesus. They tore them apart time and time again. The Pharisees and the Sadducees were never sanctioned by God. They're never mentioned in the Old Testament. Neither is the Sanhedrin. Those were entirely man-made institutions. And John had no respect for them, neither did Jesus. And just because somebody's an Israelite doesn't really mean anything. Christ is going to work with whoever, God is going to work with whoever he wants to. And it's only the faithful, it's the people that believe in Jesus that are the faithful. No, Christians are not on the outside looking in. The Jews are not the holy chosen ones. Where does it say in the Bible that the Jews are holy people? Where does it say that Israel is holy land? And by the way, Israel is going to be, I've met people that want to move to Israel. They call it the Holy Land. But they don't want Christians to move there. And there are Jews that have converted to Christianity that tried to move to Israel. They were not allowed in. They don't want it, Christians there. If you just want to visit there and take some pictures and spend some money and then leave, they'll put up with you, but they don't want you to live there. They hate Jesus. Now, granted, I know that I don't think the average Jew is any worse of a person than the average professing Christian, but that's not really saying a whole lot. There's people that profess Christianity, then there's actual Christians with the Holy Spirit that are going to be in the first resurrection, and there aren't a lot of them. But the fact remains, the Jews have rejected Christ, and he is our mediator, he is our intercessor. He's the only way that we're going to make it into the first resurrection. And Israel is not the same as the elect. So, do we have any comments?
Okay, opening it up for comments. I saw Laureen had her mic open, so did the Meyer Ranch.
Hey, I'm open too, Doug. If anybody, but I'm ready, willing to wait.
You're in. You're speaking.
All right. Tons and tons of info here. Overall, I don't think the way we think about this, as long as we're doing the commandments, right, we're good. And there's always the motivation. A lot of people with who do the replacement theology or take grafted in too far or whatever are trying to get like a special place. But those of us who keep the Sabbath and the holy days, for all intents and purposes. You have to keep the Sabbath, you have to keep the holy days, you have to believe in Yeshua, right? So if you're missing any of those, any of those components, then you're not the remnant, you're not the elect, right? What is it? The remnant is the people who do what? Who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Yeshua. So it takes both things. I really liked what you talked about on the divorce thing. That was really big in the Hebrew Roots movement a few years ago. But there's really no way to apply the Deuteronomy 24 scenario to Israel or to Judah. If you read through Jeremiah 3, they're all back together again before the chapter is over. So it's just an analogy that there were people who took that divorce thing, way too far. It's just saying it's like an analogy saying you cheated on me like a husband cheats on a wife, not because if Deuteronomy 24 says you can't remarry them, and so the Torah can't be broken. I don't know. I put a lot of stuff down here, but I don't want to really hog the time. I totally agree with you, even though I'm somebody who would be considered messianic, that all these guys who are like spending their time rebuilding the temple and trying to move to Israel and stuff like that, I don't see the profit in that either. I think that country over there that calls itself Israel is got the gayest city on earth in Tel Aviv, right? That's not a holy country. And then until they repent, repent and accept Yeshua, they're going to be in a world of hurt. I just point to the part that in Romans where Paul says that the purpose of Yahweh working with us Gentiles right now is to provoke Israel to jealousy so that we all accept Yeshua in the end. That's what we're hoping, that both Jew and Gentile alike will accept the Son of God and ultimately be saved. So, yeah. Cool. So
just to support your idea of the divorce and so on and so forth, in essence, when we become baptized, we are killing the old person, man, woman, whatever. And in essence, once you've died, you're free to marry. So, in theory, I know I'm paraphrasing this horribly. So, in essence, if a Jew or Israelite or whatever you want to call them renounces and they believe, like you said, Chris, they believe on Yeshua, they keep the law and the testimony and so on and so forth. In essence, the old persona is gone. And so when Yeshua comes back, he isn't marrying an entire country or an entity any longer. It's now about individuals. So he issued a decree of divorce to Israel, and then by dying, in essence, his bond with Judah was done. So I know I'm not really explaining that very well, but that's the terms of, in essence, changed and still are, I think, in line with Deuteronomy that Mark brought up, because the condition has changed. It's no longer countries that are wed to God. It's now individuals. I don't know, for what that's worth.
Right. Well, before 30 AD, God was only working with one nation of people. But since then, he's working with all different kinds of people and all different kinds of nations. And that's something you have to keep in mind. It's not like the ecclesia is not an actual nation. Not really.
Right. That's the point I was trying to make. It's no longer a specific entity or organization with which he has a marriage contract. It's now each individual with different terms. I don't mean different terms in the original contract. I know, again, I'm not explaining that correctly or very well, but anyway.
So the the marriage thing, the teaching that went around that said that the giving of the Torah was like a marriage covenant, I think that analogy is backwards. I think the giving of the Torah, I think that a marriage covenant is like the giving of the Torah. You would make the higher, more important thing the top part. My perspective on Deuteronomy 24 is, at no point does the man get to remarry the individual. So the death only lets the lady, like if somebody gets divorced, it lets the lady remarry. And if you look at Romans, I think 7, Paul uses Deuteronomy 24 as an analogy better. The big mystery is that Israel still exists. In the last 2,000 years, and the Messiah came, he died, tens of thousands of Jews accepted him, then hundreds of thousands of Gentiles accepted him. Then over time, they stopped keeping the law, but the Jews have maintained, and they still exist. So we have to just using our whole Romans 1 eyes, that creation testifies that the fact that they still exist, that means God must have some scheme, some plan that we aren't privy to, so for whatever that's worth.
I forgot to mention that it does say in Romans 11 that there will be broken branches that will be regrafted into the olive tree. And it specifically says Israel's rejection is not total. And yes, there is always hope for them. The door is always open to whoever will accept the truth. But we just remember that God only made physical promises to Israel, which he's already fulfilled. He promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob a multitude of descendants. Kings and nations would descend from them. He promised them the land of Canaan. Later on, he promised David that he would never lack a descendant to sit on at least part of his throne of part of Israel anyway. And he's already fulfilled that. He's still fulfilling it, but he did not specifically promise them salvation. Now, it doesn't mean that they won't be saved, because as we know, this is not the only day of salvation, and there's 2 resurrections. And just because somebody does not accept the truth in this life doesn't mean that they won't be saved. But he can work with whoever he wants. He's not restricted to just one nation of people. That's really what Paul is saying and what the Bible is saying.
I see the phone caller has unmuted. I think that's Hal.
Yeah, it's me. Just real quick, Mark, you just clarified something I was wanting to clarify. In Romans 11, in verse 19 and 20, you're referring to the branches that were pruned off, and you described them as the Jews. And I don't think it's limited to just one of the tribes. I suspect that it was made up of, and still is made up of, all the tribes. You talked about the remnant, and a lot of times when you look at the word remnant, it's referring, you can clearly tell it's referring to the tribes and not just one. I just want to clarify, because there's so much confusion where you substitute the word Jew for Israel, and it simply isn't accurate. So that's just had a quick comment on that, but you already clarified it, so I'll just keep going.
Well, I thought I'd get a little more, I thought I'd get some flack over this, because I've already caught some flack over this, over the stuff in years past. People have accused me of heresy. So I'm a little disappointed. Is anybody listening?
Okay, so the term in the beginning, I don't want to be critical. I like where you're going. I like what you're thinking about, and and even if there are differences here, they're not substantive differences, right? Our salvation is based upon accepting Yeshua and keeping the commandments. Nobody disagrees with that, and it doesn't matter about lineage. The idea of replacement theology, the term might be new. But replacement theology is really old, and that's why Catholic churches look like synagogues. Replacement theology is the idea that the church gets all the blessings of Israel and none of the curses. All the curses stay on Israel, right? Right? And all the blessings go over to the church. And as we look at the Torah and we look at Revelation, it is a relationship between God and his people. And when his people were supposed to be a light to the nations. When all the people came up to Solomon and they were bringing all their tribute and whatever, he was supposed to teach them Torah, and they were supposed to go home and do it. What happened? They brought up the Asherah pole, and up go the idols, right? So that's the wall of separation is torn down, and the Ruach, the Spirit, goes out to everybody. So that way we actually have God's plan being fulfilled now, to where everybody can come directly to him through his Son. And so it's not really a replacement theology. It's being adopted into God's family is what it is, and it's a family that he intended to have. So, but the idea when I started talking is just the idea that replacement theology is something that dispensationalists use, and lots of Christians will say, we're going to heaven, or the rest of us are like, well, when I read Revelation, it says New Jerusalem's coming here, right? Right? It's a totally different dynamic, and there's, when you see the special people, the 144,000, who are they? Well, they're from all the tribes, right? That they are, and there's no way around that. So there's still some purpose for them in the end,
All right.
But I'll call you a heretic if you want, but I don't believe you are one. I mean, I could just further the call if you want.
I mean, if people don't criticize me, I figure they're just not even paying attention to me.
Yeah, they're just polite and nice.
That's how I look at it. But no, I'm glad you brought up some good things that I wanted to bring up too. That was Isaiah 49:6, that Israel was supposed to be a light to the nations. It was supposed to be an example. And I think that the church, the ecclesia, is supposed to accomplish what Israel failed to do. We're supposed to lead others. We're supposed to teach others. We're supposed to be a positive example to the rest of the world. Oftentimes we're ridiculed for that, unfortunately, but I think that the church had the same mission that Israel did.
Well, and it supports
Also,
that. It says, no longer will you not see your teachers, but they will be behind you and saying, hey, this is the way, walk ye in it. So we can actually do that now. Politely, though, of course.
Mark, this is Mike, and I want to talk about definitions. And the doctrine, which we would call a replacement theology, is actually called supersessionism. Are you familiar with that?
never heard of that.
Oh, okay. That's the old doctrine. You can look it up. And then in describing what that means, supersessionism goes back to supersede. And so the arguments were in the second century church between does the Gentile church supersede the Israelites and or not? And that goes back to the famous arguments between Bishop Victor about 150 AD and Polycrates, who was a disciple of Polycarp, who was a disciple of John, in Asia. So in Asia, they continued to practice the Sabbath, the Passover, etc. Whereas in Egypt and in Rome, they felt that was identifying too much with Judaism. And so to make themselves distinct from, between themselves from just being a sect of Judaism, they they took on the practice of only keeping Easter as Resurrection Day and ignoring Passover, and then they also kept Sunday as Resurrection Day and ignored keeping the Sabbath. So these arguments go back to about 150 AD. And it was actually about 110, 120 AD when, you know, the first people that came out of Alexandria that we should be distinct from Jews and not be just a sect of Judaism, you know, because of the whole problem with the Jews with, you know, their wars with Rome. And so they didn't want to be known in Rome as having anything to do with Judaism. So that's where the actual term goes back. So rather than say a big word like supersessionism, you know, they brought it down to replacement theology, which is one of the words that would be used to describe what supersessionism is. And so it came to the point in 325 AD that it to a new level when the church became incorporated into the Roman Empire, that Constantine made an edict that if anyone is practicing anything with Judaism, that they are just to be executed, because the church has superseded, you know, has replaced, would be another word, Israel. So the most active in enforcing that would be the Eastern Orthodox Church, where if you keep the Sabbath, you go to hell. So that's the actual doctrine, you know, of which, you know, now we're bantering around terms, and I became concerned about some of the things Harold Smith was saying, and had a good talk with Dr. Mark Kaplan about that, and he actually pointed out the differences on, you know, that the true replacement or supersessionists do away with any concept of Israel. Now everything is the Gentile church being the new bride of Christ. And, you know, the examples would be, say, if you divorce your old wife, and it's a nasty divorce, and you have a nice new wife, would you force your new wife to sleep in the same bed as your old wife? Would you force your new wife to cook all the same meals just like your old wife? You know, would you force her to wear your old wife's clothes? And so that's how they look at maintaining the practices of Judaism, of the Sabbath and the holy days, is that it's a brand new wife. You need new things for the new wife. And that's the actual definition of a supersessionist. And since then, the Roman Catholic Church has pedaled backwards on that to have a more moderate view. And the Protestant Church has done more backpedaling, even to the point of having Christian Zionists. And so what we have now are the, you know, people that are kind of going back to the Bible and saying, well, these things are in the Bible. It's not just Judaism, you know, these are biblical things. So now we have the movement of people going back to the Bible. So according to Mark Kaplan, what you're talking about is not the actual replacement theology. That's something far more extreme.
Well, Mike, see, people are always trying to find excuses not to keep the law. And if they're going to say, well, God has divorced Israel, that means there's no more law. Well, that doesn't mean any such thing.
Well, that's something to discuss with Bishop Victor. He had quite the discussion with Polycrates about that. And that's all recorded. That's actually in the the church fathers' writings, and it was a dispute that got so hot that another bishop from France actually got in between them and said, "Hey, you guys, we're all brethren. You know, we should be working together as brothers. We shouldn't be at war with each other." But it was an actual war that broke out, and then it kind of settled down, you know, because they had other issues to deal with, like Marcion and other heretics. So they tried to stay tolerant, you know, between the Sabbath-keeping churches and the Sunday-keeping churches. But then Constantine kind of came in and laid down the law and said, if you do anything like what's in the Old Testament, we're going to kill you. So that would be the true supersessionism, is what Constantine.
Well, like I was saying, Israel does not own the law. There's no copyright.
Right. So what you're
God's
saying
law
is
is
not,
anybody's people.
it's not replacement theology. What you're doing is sifting out the Bible and saying what's right in the Bible. But the actual doctrine of supersessionism actually developed about 120 AD and was locked into place by 325.
Yeah.
And so that term is already taken, and you're not a replacement theologist.
Well, going back to what Mark said, that, you know, no one owns God. You know, the Jews don't own the law. The Jews don't own God. God is God. And so he can choose to call whomever he chooses. He can, you know, it's his whole plan. And for us to debate, I mean, there's been verses thrown in my face from the Old Testament where, oh, they're going to take hold of the tzitzits of the Jew and so on and so forth, you know, and using that as proof that you have to be a Jew. And, you know, that's not what that verse actually talks about at all. It's talking about at the time, you know, those were the folks that seemed to be following God's way. And so they didn't have a term Christian. You know, they didn't have a term for, you know, someone who had a relationship with a direct relationship with God, because that's really what it ultimately boils down to. You know, nobody has a monopoly on a relationship with God. But that's the whole point of this exercise, is to have a relationship with God. So you can either choose to be at the wedding feast, or you can choose to be at the wedding feast later. You know, when you're out shopping for oil. I don't know. I'm being facetious. But anyway, that's...
Somebody did mention the 144,000 from Revelation 7, and I wanted to bring that up. And yes, there's 12,000 from each tribe that are sealed, and that is in verses, that's Rev 7, verses 5 through 8. But if you pick it up in verse 9, there's another group being described too, who are also going to be sealed. After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could number, of all nations, all tribes, peoples, tongues, standing before the throne, before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands, crying out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. And all the angels stood around the throne, and the elders and the four living creatures fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God. Now, all right, we've got in verses 5 through 8, those are Israelites pretty specifically. Then we've got another group, a multitude, a huge multitude. And apparently they're Israelites, although, I mean, they're not Israelites, but they might be, I suspect, this might include some Israelites too, because what I think, when it talks about 144,000, I thought those were just people that were protected from the tribulation. But obviously we know that not all Christians will be protected from the tribulation. Now, let's pick this up again. Verse 14, and I said to him, Sir, you know, he said to me, these are the ones who came out of the great tribulation and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Well, they came out of the tribulation. Now, it doesn't say that they're Israelites or Gentiles. So we really don't know, but these are people that, well, I think they're mostly Gentiles, but they might include Israelites too. Any more comments?
So the picture we see there is why it's important to study the Torah and the temple and stuff and the tabernacle, because what the picture there is showing us, like when the temple stood. Can you hear me? Do you want to see me too? Is that Don? You want to see me?
No. Dr. John Merritt's on. I'm just waving hello.
All right. I mean, I could turn my camera on and you could look at my Kansas City Chiefs championship T-shirt if you want. So, no, the way the temple was set up is that you start from the most holy place, then you have the holy place, and that's where the most holy place is where the Kohen Gadol goes. Then you have the holy areas where only the Kohen can go. Then you have the greater temple where all the Kohen and the Levites can go. Then you have the gate of the men's court. Then you have the women's court. Then you have the Gentile court. And so as you move further away, you kind of lose some holiness, but it's showing that it's showing kind of an analogy that the temple is for all the nations. And so when you have these 144,000 Israelites are this super duper like amazing group of people who have the bloodline and keep the commandments and have Yeshua, and then surrounding them is this enormous multitude of people who keep the commandments and believe in Yeshua, and it's a grafting in, and it's all that was what I would call the Israel of God, you know, when Paul has that famous phrase, the Israel of God, so that everybody's, you know, as united as possible in one thing.
Well, Alan's been extremely quiet tonight.
Well, I'm sorry. I had a phone call until just now. I just got back.
Ah, okay.
My daughter called me from Florida, and I had to get off and talk to her. So,
Okay.
How are you doing, Mark?
Well, I'm still alive.
Good.
So, for
What,
the time being.
so are you asking a very particular question at this time? Or where are we with this?
That was half an hour ago, Alan. That was an hour ago.
Yeah, he had a phone call with his daughter.
Yeah, I was off. I'm sorry.
Well, I wasn't really asking a question. I was just giving my opinion.
Oh, so you
But
have
I'm sure you would have
opinions.
agreed with me.
So now you have opinions. Is that it?
Yeah, I'm sorry for that. So I'll apologize in advance and behind, but
Yeah, it's a very big topic. I think bringing in of the Gentiles and trying to figure out all the details, the minute details, especially the way it's spelled out in Romans 11, where he says at the end, you know, how awesome he is to have developed such a plan where people can be grafted in, and that it's past finding out. And that's one of the things I've noticed is much of what's being done here on this earth, it's past finding out. But yeah, it's a kind of a mind candy for us because we want to know the answers. And so we spend time trying to figure out the mystery of how these things are being done. You know, one of the places, I think it's in Peter, he says, these are things that angels desire to look into. Why do they desire? Because they don't know either all the details of how it all goes down. So it's a wonderful thing that we've been given. You know, the scriptures give us bits and pieces, but the full mystery of it is something that we won't know until afterwards. And I view most of prophecy that way. Most of the prophecies that have already been fulfilled were only clear afterwards, not before they were fulfilled. And so I look at future prophecy the same way. The things that are about to happen or will eventually happen in our lifetime, we'll understand it clearly afterwards. But to try to pigeonhole it or to try to force it into or back it into something that we want it to be, a pattern or the way we hope it will be, it's kind of a fool's errand in a way.
Yeah. Well, all I'm really saying, what it comes down to is that it's not about genetics, it's about belief. And it's not about Israel, it's about Christ. And that's what Paul was saying in Galatians 3:28 and 29. He summed it all right up in those two verses, right there in a nutshell.
Hold on.
Mhm.
Yeah. But it's a fascinating topic to, it's something that resurfaces over and over again because we see it both Old and New Testament. And, one of the verses I love out of Isaiah that gets quoted in the New Testament is that my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations. And we find that at the second cleansing of the temple. But to have an absolute clear picture of it, no. But we desire it in our hearts. We long for the day, right? Another verse that really turns me on is from Haggai chapter 2, where he says, and the desire of all nations shall come. What does that even mean? In what way do all nations desire him? And what is it that they desire? I don't know. Other than I think down deep inside, we all want peace. We all want security. We want answers to the biggest questions. So this verse, the desire of all nations shall come, is still a future event. And what you broached tonight is a huge topic that it can be looked at from a 1,000 different angles. So thanks a lot. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, I'm already done. I got nothing else unless somebody else wants to add.
Yeah, we don't have any other comments. We can just swing right into, Mike's mic is unmuted.
Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to continue on to that what Mark was stating would not be viewed as replacement theology by anybody, as he presented it. And even the most extreme, the Eastern Orthodox view of that the new Gentile church replaces Israel is not that strict. They see it as the continuation. That's why the superseding doesn't totally replace, because superseding means that you are the next step. So the way they look at it is that they're the new bride, and the nation of Israel was the old bride. And so they're the most extreme with, I would say Martin Luther's theology was probably second to the Eastern Orthodox Church as being anti-Judaism. And he was very, deletus not expletive in his description of Judaism and Jews. He was a Jew hater, the consummate anti-Semite. And so in his tradition, it is a heresy to do anything from the old law, from the old covenant. We have a better law. We have a better new covenant. And if we even dabble with that, we're just going back to the old muck. And so different people have viewed it differently. But what Mark is saying is just, well, we just go by the Bible and we don't, go by the isms. And so we believe, that Gentiles are part of the church and that we all go by the Bible. And that's perfectly heretical to Martin Luther and the Eastern Orthodox Church, but I don't think any of us would think of it as heretical because we just believe in going by the Bible.
I got a couple of comments on the word Gentile. Most of the time, I think that people biblically define a Gentile as a non-Israelite, but that's not really supportable when you look at the Greek word ethnos, or the Hebrew goy or goyim. They're nations. I mean, they can be other than Israel, and sometimes contextually you can tell it most certainly is Israel. So these statements that are basically saying Jew and Gentile is really not a correct translation because, of course, it begs the question, so the other 11 tribes aren't included, or this is just non-Israelites and Jews. So just a clarification there, something I think is commonly confused. So, and that's all I got to say about that.
This is John Merritt in Florida. Am I unmuted?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, I thought you were starting at 7:30 Central and 8:30 my time, so I only caught the last 10 minutes of what you had to say. But I must say, for some reason, the last 10 minutes, I didn't find anything to disagree with, which, I usually try to pick something out to disagree, but certainly wholeheartedly agree with your conclusion, although I didn't hear all the details how you got to those conclusions, but I think I could probably understand that well. The comment I had to make in addition to that was we're talking about various groups being anti-Semitic. You have Martin Luther, of course, who is among the most anti-Semitic of all Christian writers, but you had others, and the Muslims, of course, are very anti-Semitic, and when you study the history of those developments, both the Muslims and Muhammad himself, he originally thought he could bring in the Jews into his flock, and he actually evangelized 2 Jews, even married a Jewish woman among his early wives, and but the Jews thought that over a little bit, decided not to accept Islam, and then they became a very anti-Semitic. Martin Luther's history, as you all know, is sort of similar. At first, he thought he had such a logical kind of thing that the Jews would just sort of come right on over to his anti-Roman Catholic, scriptural based kind of thing, and they would flock over to his thing. And then when they didn't do that, he became very, very anti-Semitic too. And there's sort of a parallel of that happening. And I think somewhat even in the history of the churches of God early on, we had, here we have Sabbath, we have holy days, we have clean meats, and you'd think that the Jews would just sort of just jump right into it, all become members of the churches of God. You'd think so. In fact, in most of my last 50 years or so of walk, a lot of my Jewish friends, became much more observant when they brushed elbows on me because they weren't observant before. But now they got a guy who's more Jewish than they are. So they became just a little bit resentful and actually began to observe holy days and quit ordering their shrimp with their cocktails and so forth.
Well, we started at 7, by the way, not 7:30.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, and I tried to make this clear that, no, I'm not anti-Semitic. And I said, I don't think the average Jew is any worse than the average professing Christian, but that's not really saying a whole lot. I'm talking about people that are going to be in the first resurrection.
Yeah.
And that's not very many people.
Within the Church of God over history, the Church of God, in my opinion, often became a bit anti-Semitic because they were being more Jewish than the Jews were, and the Jews weren't following along this, so it became a little bit antagonistic. I remember I was at a feast, one of the feasts in Panama City some years ago, and one of the leaders of one of the Churches of God, we were out swimming in the waves and all, and he stopped me, and after a while he said, how come you do all that Jewish stuff? And I said, like what you mean? He said, yeah, all that Jewish stuff. And I said, you mean like Sabbath? No, like holy days? No, like no. Anyway, he was sort of offended by my tzitzits, my talit, or
Okay, we've all heard that kind of thing. And my answer to that is, they're not Jewish laws. Those are God's laws.
Yeah. So anyway, there is a tendency when the Jews don't seem to follow along to begin to sort of be anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic there. But anyway, just an observation. It's more historical, but certainly not any justification. Just a thought.
Thank you.
One thing I can add to that, I found that people are offended if you use Hebrew. And, it's like, well, wasn't that the language that the Bible was written in? Is it wrong to actually know that language and to speak it? And but there is some backpedaling on, I've heard slurs against using the Hebrew language in church services. And so we can be, maybe a little bit anti the original, what the original thing was. And, and Greek is a language that everything was translated into, and then from there, in our direction, translated to Latin and to German and to English. But now where the 12 apostles went, the original 11 plus 1, they all went east, and they went to the tribes of Israel, and which did not speak Greek. But for some reason, I think it's because of the quality of the epistles of Paul that everybody wanted to hear what he had to say. So the Eastern churches wanted copies translated into Aramaic of the epistles of Paul, but there's 3 ancient testimonies that the book of Matthew was originally written in either Hebrew or Aramaic, depending if they discern between the two. And so the Eastern churches had a gospel, but they were basically, reading the scriptures, which would be Tanakh. And so it seems that, in the West, we have a greater body of what we call scripture. But then that was kind of on the basis that it was the Greek church that separated itself very, distinctly from Judaism, whereas the Eastern churches may have not made that great distinction like the Greek churches did.
So in our group, or our walk, we wear tzitzits and we have a talit as well. Only one of those things is in the Bible. The talit's not in the Bible. It's it's a tradition. And the part of the replacement theology or the anti-Semitism is that we're conditioned to say the Jews rejected Jesus. So then we just build this wall and we never look at how they do stuff. But when you look at the Jewish commentary, called the Talmud, and see in some cases where they talk about how to keep the Sabbath outside the land, how to keep the holy days outside the land. In some places we disagree, some places we agree. So it's kind of like looking at a Matthew Henry commentary. But the first time our congregation kept a Seder for Passover, the family that hosted it used an actual Jewish Seder. And for the life of me, I don't know why they did that, but as we went through the different elements of the night, it's an hours-long thing, you right out of a Jewish Siddur, which is their prayer book, you could see the Messiah in all of these things, right? When they're like, the light, I'm the light of the world, as we're lighting the candles and all the prayers and stuff like that. So today, we have a Seder where we've actually gone through the Jewish Haggadah and added the Messiah where he belongs. So that, because the first, 200, 300 years, well, actually almost as late as 400 something, the Council of Laodicea had to actually order the Christians to stop reading Torah portions on Shabbat. And so the Jewishness, or which we say with a broad term, not excluding other tribes, but the Jewishness of the faith was in the first century was indiscernible between Judaism. They kept the same holy days, they worshiped in the synagogue. And so replacement theology is something that Mike was talking about that comes along in the second and third centuries, where there's this political split because the temple has come down, the Romans have destroyed Israel, and they've destroyed the Jewish people, and now the Christians aren't welcome in the synagogue, and they're not welcome in Rome. So you start getting these new traditions, and you get these other ideas that maybe the Christian church is supposed to replace Israel in some fashion, which in the end, as we talked about with 144,000, we'll see everybody coming back together at the end, with the holy people having the 144,000, and then all of the remnant, surrounding that. But I just kind of want to encourage people to not be turned off when you see us, saying things in Hebrew like Mike saying, and see us, doing kind of Hebraic type stuff. It's because a lot of the Jewish people are reciting prayers that include a Messiah. They don't even know it. Someday their eyes are going to be open and they're going to be like, wow, why didn't we see this before? Sorry, I'm hogging time.
I think a lot of the
our experience is very similar when we started in our family doing a Seder on the night to be much observed back in the early 90s. We didn't have a tradition of how to do that. So we went down to the grocery store and picked up a Maxwell House coffee Seder. And that's what we had. And John Barry Skidmore and his family had joined us, and we went through that with about 20 of us. And the next time we definitely left out Rabbi Eleazar and Rabbi Akiva, and left out those things. And over a few years, we would add New Testament scriptures to each of the steps. And just as
Amen. Keep going.
We would find that there were just these great parallels between all the 15 steps. And then we would add music, some Messianic and some Church of God music to each of those steps there too, to sort of worship there. And sort of developed our own Haggadah over the years, because they had a lot of mysteries in there that they didn't understand. And most of my Jewish friends read these things and they don't understand. But when they come to one of our Seders, they leave with a much broader understanding that division between Judaism and Messianic and Christianity really wasn't very distinct. It was sort of a blend of things. And then of course we added our own traditions to that over the hundreds of years. But anyway, our experience is very similar to that, evolving as we learn more.
So our before we, I know the speaker tonight, Mark, probably wants to get back at it, but ours is available if anybody wants to, send me an email or send something in this messenger thing here. Ours is in PDF, and I could send it around. We have it's called a Messianic Seder, or Messianic Haggadah. So we created one that has Yeshua in his proper place. So that way, if anybody wants to give it a shot, you can have and it's not like it's holy or something. It's not like it can't be changed, but if you want to have something to work with, to start with, that doesn't have all the Rabbi Elazar, stuff in it, we can give that to you, no problem.
Is that on your website, or how you want to type in where they can, in the chat room, and then they can?
Well, I'll just give you my email. I don't know if it's on our website right now. I have to check it out. Okay. So, anyway, I'll put it in the chat room if anybody wants to get a hold of me. So.
Okay.
Just one quick comment is that what Dr. Mayer was mentioning about a lot of the reasons why people have rejected the law is because of anti-Semitism, and it was actually one of the reasons why the Emperor Constantine instituted Sunday worship on July 3rd of 321, and he said we should not Judaize the Sabbath. They were trying to do things different than the Jews. And that's when they instituted, shortly after at Nicaea in 325, they instituted Easter. Well, we're not going to do Passover, we're going to do Easter. We're not going to do Saturday, we're going to do Sunday. And so on. And it just kept on going. But we just have to remember that these are not Jewish laws, these are God's laws. And God wants everyone to keep them, whoever you are. Everybody will keep them eventually. And we've all been, I'm sure we've all heard, well, are you a Jew? Well, no. You don't have to be a Jew to keep the law. Anybody can do it if they want to.
One of my
are saying that they have a digital copy in PDF of what Chris has. We could put that on P-Score. It's a very good idea. I don't know where to put it. That would be up to Anna. But yeah, we put that on peacegoer.org. That'd be great. Seeing we have the spring piece listed there.
One of my medical assistants wears heat seats, and he, unlike me, who wears my inside the pockets, he has his long and hanging out. And people will say to him, "Oh, you're Jewish," and he says, "No, but I've read the book." And that often leads to him, engaging in a conversation. I'm actually quite impressed how he uses that to evangelize, and he actually brought a lot of people to observing, through his "No, but I've read the book" introduction. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another certain person said, "Yeah, I read to the end of the book and we went." Okay, I misread what Anna is saying, that if we get a copy of it from you, Chris, we could put it up on P-Score for people to use as a guideline. Because we had the spring piece stuff, thanks to all of Anna's hard work.
I'll get it to you guys. Because Passover is it is the most personal day for us. It's the day that Yeshua died for our sins. So we have it set up to where everybody who attends gets an assignment to read something or to do something. So when you look at it, it's going to have a bunch of people's names in it. And every year we send around a Word document to see who's going to attend, and we change the names. So that way we want everybody who comes to, really, this is the wedding supper of the Lamb. It literally is that when you have it, when you do this, you're not, it's, I guess, metaphorically, but so we have it set up to where everybody who comes will have some part in the evening. And because we, when you look at the way traditional Christianity and Judaism has turned into, is that you have this one guy at the front of the room who does everything for everybody else. And so we kind of want to push away from that and encourage people to participate, to understand what they're doing, and to have some skin in the game, so to speak. So I'll drop it in this. It says you can put files here, so I'll drop it in this file thing here in a second. Okay?
Very good. That'll work. And Anna can grab it then.
Another point kind of along those lines is the Passover is not a convocation. It was kept in homes with families or extended families. It's not your traditional service, quote unquote. So in agreement with the point made.
So any other comments? I think we've...
And on what the gentleman just said, on that is our he's absolutely right. The Passover is not a Moedim. It's the night before a Moedim. It's the night it turns into 14 turning into 15. So the reason we make this available is that we hope that people will come and do it with us, and then go do it with somebody else the next year. And then, commutations and permeations. We kind of want more people to do it. So we want to, do it in an empowering fashion, so people don't feel like, oh, I'm not worthy. Because when it comes down to the night that Yeshua died, are any of us worthy? No. The answer is no. You can shake your head. It's okay, right? Right? None of us are worthy, right? So people get this stigma that the guy up front, with Mike Waters and all of his knowledge, and this gentleman, Mr. Merritt here, that the guys who've done all the studying are somehow better than the other people. And we kind of want to break down those walls and empower people to kind of let the Spirit move and get some stuff done. So, okay.
I just wanted to comment on the Passover not being an appointed time. It's listed with the others in Leviticus 23 as an appointed time, and it's actually called a Hag in Exodus 34:25.